Battle of South Mountain, the battle that almost ended Lee's invasion. What happens when 1,200 exhausted Confederate soldiers face off against 3,500 determined Pennsylvanians on a mountain ridge so steep it could break a mule's spirit? Why did General Meade risk everything on terrain that looked more like a rockslide than a battlefield? And how did a brigade of Westerners earn a nickname so legendary that even their enemies whispered it with respect? Welcome to the Battle of South Mountain, a clash of iron wills, cannon smoke, and last-minute miracles. This isn't just a story about who fired first or who held the high ground. It's about how chaos, courage, and sheer grit shaped the fate of an entire campaign. So buckle up, history lovers, because this isn't just a battle, it's a cinematic saga of fire, fury, and fate. The night was still and heavy with the scent of dew-soaked grass. In the pre-dawn hours of Sunday, September 14, 1862, the Confederate commander General Robert E. Lee sat in his headquarters tent, cloaked in silence and strategy. The stars above Maryland blinked faintly, unaware of the storm about to break beneath them. Suddenly, the flap of Lee's tent parted. A courier from Major General J.E.B. Stuart stepped in, breathless and mud-splattered. His message was short but devastating. McClellan's Army of the Potomac is in Frederick. Close, too close. Lee's heart sank. The illusion of time and distance shattered. For weeks he had gambled on McClellan's caution, believing Little Mac would hesitate, stall, and miss his chance. But now, with Lee's marching orders, Special Order 191, in Union hands, the Army of Northern Virginia was dangerously exposed. His forces were scattered across Maryland, divided into vulnerable columns. The trap was set, and Lee was inside it. He summoned his trusted lieutenant, Major General James Longstreet. The two men bent over maps by lantern light, their fingers tracing ridgelines and passes. Lee pointed to Turner's Gap, the northernmost pass through South Mountain. "We make our stand here," he said. Longstreet frowned. "It's a gamble, General. We should fall back, regroup, and let the Federals come to us." But Lee was resolute. Dispatches flew from his tent like sparks from a fire. He ordered Jackson and McLaws to press the siege at Harper's Ferry. Major General D.H. Hill was sent to Turner's Gap to prepare the defenses. The fate of the campaign now rested on a thin line of mountain passes. By 5:30 a.m., General Hill arrived at the Old Mountain House, a stately stone tavern perched on the National Turnpike. He surveyed the terrain with a grim eye. The mountain was majestic, but unforgiving. It could only be held by a large force, he muttered, and was wholly indefensible by a small one. With only 8,000 men to defend Turner's Gap, Fox's Gap, and the Frosttown Plateau, Hill made a hard choice. He concentrated his forces around Turner's Gap. Colonel Alfred H. Colquitt's brigade took the heights near the tavern. Brigadier General Samuel Garland, Jr., moved into Fox's Gap. Brigadier General George B. Anderson's brigade was summoned to reinforce the line. The rest remained near Boonesboro, guarding the Confederate supply wagons. To the south, Brigadier General Paul J. Semmes guarded Brownsville and Crampton's Gaps, uncertain which route the Federals would choose. The Confederate line was a patchwork, brave but brittle. At 5:49 a.m., the first light crested the warm September sky. Brigadier General Alfred Pleasonton's cavalry resumed its reconnaissance, screening the Army of the Potomac's advance. By 6 a.m., Colonel Eliakim P. Scammon's 1st Brigade of the Kanawha Division began marching toward Turner's Gap, with General Jacob D. Cox riding alongside. As they moved, a ghost from 2 days prior appeared. Colonel Augustus Moore, recently paroled after capture near Frederick. He passed by the column, eyes wide, voice trembling. "My God, be careful, but I am paroled." That was enough. Cox immediately called up Colonel George Crook's 2nd Brigade and ordered caution. The mountain was waking, and danger lurked in its folds. Federal artillery opened fire on Turner's Gap, and Confederate guns responded from the eastern hill. The exchange was fierce, forcing the southern batteries to shift positions repeatedly. Pleasonton informed Cox that Turner's Gap was heavily defended. Cox changed tactics. He would strike Fox's Gap from the flank. Scammon's brigade, 3 Ohio regiments strong, moved southwest from Bolivar, then turned onto Sharpsburg Road. The march was slow, broken by rests and stops to close ranks. Cox gathered 23 guns on a hill near Bolivar, and they thundered against the Confederate lines. At 8 a.m., Scammon's men came under fire from Captain John Pelham's horse artillery. Scammon ordered his lead regiments into battle line. Crook's brigade appeared in the distance, reinforcing the attack. But Garland's brigade had arrived at Fox's Gap. Though weakened from the Peninsula Campaign and filled with raw conscripts, they held the high ground. Only Wells and Len 100 riflemen stood against Cox's entire division. Many didn't even know how to load their muskets properly. At 9:30 a.m., the clash erupted. Colonel Rutherford B. Hayes, future President of the United States, led the 23rd Ohio against Colonel Duncan McRae's 5th North Carolina. The Carolinians fired devastating volleys into the Buckeyes. Smoke curled through the trees. The air was thick with musket balls and shouted orders. Hayes, undeterred, raised his voice above the chaos. "Fix bayonets," he roared. With steel gleaming in the morning sun, the 23rd Ohio surged forward. The North Carolinians fired one last volley, but the Buckeyes pressed on with a wild roar. Raw recruits broke ranks. Panic spread. The 5th North Carolina retreated. Hayes halted to reform his line. McRae rallied his men and fired again. Hayes ordered another charge, driving the Carolinians back across the cornfield toward Ridge Road. But the 23rd Ohio was exhausted. As they neared a stone wall, they were hit by combined fire from 3 North Carolina regiments. Hayes bent his line to protect his flanks, refusing to give ground but unable to advance further. Now pause for a sec. Join the front lines of history and power. Welcome to European Battle, where epic clashes, legendary warriors, and untold stories come alive. By subscribing and turning on notifications, you're not just joining a channel. You're stepping into a world of thrilling battles, strategic brilliance, and jaw-dropping historical drama. From ancient empires to modern warfare, we deliver cinematic storytelling, expert insights, and exclusive content that will leave you breathless. Why subscribe? Unlock premium battle breakdowns and rare historical footage. Be the first to witness new episodes and live events. Join a passionate community of history lovers and strategy minds. Fuel your curiosity with facts, theories, and fierce debates. Don't just watch history, live it. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to never miss a moment of the action. Your front row seat to Europe's greatest battles is just one click away. European Battle, where legends clash. The morning sun had barely crested the ridgeline when Colonel Rutherford B. Hayes, commanding the 23rd Ohio, stood tall amidst the smoke and chaos of Fox's Gap. His voice rang out over the din of musketry, ordering his men to advance, but fate had other plans. At precisely 9:45 a.m., a Minié ball tore through the air and struck Hayes in the left arm, just above the elbow. He collapsed, his body crumpling into the blood-soaked grass between the lines. For 20 agonizing minutes, he lay stranded in no man's land, the battle raging around him. Bullets zipped overhead, artillery thundered, and yet Hayes remained, wounded, vulnerable, and alone. Then, like ghosts from the smoke, his comrades surged forward. Under fire, they dragged him to safety, their hands slick with blood and grit. Hayes would survive, and the legend of the future president was born in that crucible. By 10 a.m., the 23rd Ohio had been reinforced by the 11th Ohio. Scammon's men fixed bayonets, their faces grim and determined. With a roar, they surged forward against Garland's brigade. The melee was savage. Rifles became clubs, bayonets flashed like lightning. The Buckeyes smashed into the stunned North Carolinians, who reeled under the pressure. Within minutes, Garland's men buckled and fell back from their stone wall defenses, reforming at the base of South Mountain. Brigadier General Samuel Garland, Jr. knew the line was breaking. He ordered the 13th North Carolina forward through Daniel Wise's field. As the regiment advanced, Lieutenant Colonel Ruffin spotted Garland and shouted, "General, why do you stay here? You are in great danger." Garland's reply was calm, almost fatalistic. "I may as well be here as yourself." Ruffin, frustrated, reminded him of his duty to command from the rear. But before the words could settle, a bullet struck Ruffin in the hip, spinning him around. Another Minié ball followed, this one finding Garland. He collapsed instantly. Troops rushed to place him on a blanket and carry him north, but it was too late. At 10:15 a.m., Samuel Garland, Jr. died in Wise's field, his blood soaking the soil he had sworn to defend. Command of Garland's shattered brigade fell to Colonel Duncan McRae. With Cox's Kanawha Division pressing hard, McRae felt the weight of command settle like a stone on his shoulders. He dispatched an aide to Major General D.H. Hill, pleading for reinforcements. For the next half hour, the fight was brutal and intimate. Men grappling in the smoke, bayonets thrusting, muskets cracking. At last, around 11:30 a.m., George B. Anderson's brigade arrived, shoring up the crumbling Confederate line, but the damage was done. Garland's brigade had suffered 37% casualties. Scammond's and Crook's brigades now held the stone wall. The morning fight at Fox's Gap was over. From noon to 2 p.m., both sides licked their wounds and summoned reinforcements. Major General Jesse Reno moved his Iron Corps toward the sound of battle. D.H. Hill patched his line with Anderson's men and brought up Ripley's and Drayton's brigades. Artillery batteries were dragged into place. The mountain bristled with guns. George T. Anderson's brigade arrived to bolster Hill's weary line. By 2 p.m., Wilcox's 1st Division began its slow ascent up the old Sharpsburg Road. Shells screamed overhead. The air was thick with anticipation. Drayton's brigade held the far left of Wise's Field in a rough L formation. Hill, sensing the vulnerability, left Brigadier General Ripley in command and rode off to inspect Turner's Gap. At 4 p.m., the storm broke. Scammond's Ohioans surged forward, tearing into Drayton's lines. Wilcox's men threw off their knapsacks, loaded their rifles, and fixed bayonets. The second phase of Fox's Gap had begun. Brigadier General Samuel D. Sturgis' 2nd Division joined the fray at 4:30. The Confederates fought stubbornly, launching counterattacks that were crushed by sheer Union numbers. By 5 p.m., Drayton's brigade cracked. The 17th Michigan and 45th Pennsylvania broke their lines. Drayton had lost 51% of his command. At 5:30 p.m., Salvation thundered down the wood road. Major General John Bell Hood's division arrived, shoring up Drayton's broken ranks. G.T. Anderson's and G.B. Anderson's brigades moved to support the right flank. At 6 p.m., G.B. Anderson's men reached the Rocky Pass and launched a counterattack, only to be caught in a deadly enfilade by Colonel Harrison Fairchild's brigade. Anderson's men melted away under the fire, leaving the slopes littered with the dead. Wilcox ordered Colonel Edward Ferrero's brigade forward to hold the Ninth Corps' foothold. As the sun dipped below the horizon, fighting slowed. By 7 p.m., Federal skirmishers crept through the dark woods, nerves taut. Major General Jesse Reno rode down the old Sharpsburg Road, congratulating his men. He was beloved, a soldier's soldier. But as he approached Ferrero's brigade, movement flickered in the woods. Musketry cracked. A bullet struck Reno's sword scabbard, ricocheted, and slammed into his chest. He dismounted slowly, whispering, "I am wounded, badly." Stretcher-bearers carried him down the mountain, placing him under a great oak. At 7 p.m., Jesse L. Reno died, another general claimed by Wise's Field. The sun hung low over the Maryland hills, casting long shadows across the rugged terrain of Turner's Gap. Atop the heights near the old mountain house, Confederate batteries thundered to life. Their cannons roared, sending shells screaming down into the valley below where Union General Joseph Hooker's I Corps was deploying. The Pennsylvania batteries responded with fury. Galloping to the front of Meade's division, they unlimbered at the base of Frosttown Road and returned fire, their guns shaking the earth with each blast. Smoke curled into the sky, mingling with the golden light of late afternoon. At 1:30 p.m., Seymour's brigade reached the Garber House. Orders came swiftly: probe the area, find the enemy. The rebels were there, in strength, dug into the hamlet of Frosttown. Hooker, sensing the scale of the fight ahead, moved his divisions down what would later be called Dahlgren Road and halted Seymour just north of Frosttown Road. Meade's Pennsylvania reserves deployed in brigade lines a mile and a half north of the National Pike, straddling Mount Tabor Road. They faced west, toward a series of ridges and ravines that grew steeper near the crest. This was the Frosttown Plateau, Confederate-held, rugged and deadly. Opposite Hooker's I Corps stood the brigades of Robert E. Rhodes and Alfred H. Colquitt. Colquitt held high ground south and east of Turner's Gap. Rhodes, with only 1,200 men, stretched his line across terrain too vast to defend. At 4 p.m., Meade launched his attack. Seymour, Gallagher, and Magleton advanced in a coordinated front, but the terrain betrayed them. Rocky gorges and tangled woods broke their cohesion. Within minutes, the brigades lost contact and fought as isolated units. At 4:30, the battle erupted. Seymour's 1st Brigade on the far right clashed with Confederates near the Widow Main House. Musket volleys from Rodes's line halted Seymour's advance cold. Gallagher's brigade pushed forward obliquely in the center, trying to keep pace with Seymour. Rodes ordered his Alabamians to hold fire until the Yankees were within 100 yards. When they did fire, the effect was devastating. Gallagher was wounded in the arm and left the field, handing command to Lieutenant Colonel Robert Anderson. Meade stayed close to the center, watching for a Confederate flanking move. As the sun dipped behind the mountain, Rodes's men clung to their positions, praying for darkness. Magleton's brigade crept up the right flank. Anderson's men smashed into Rodes's center. Seymour's brigade finally broke through the exhausted Alabamians. By 7 p.m., Meade's division shattered Rodes's defense and began driving the Confederates off South Mountain. But the rebels weren't done yet. At 7:15, Evans' brigade, led by Colonel Peter F. Stevens, arrived. Stevens had never led a brigade before, but he threw his South Carolinians into the fray. They held briefly in an open field, but Meade's division overlapped and outflanked them. Stevens' men suffered 50% casualties before being driven from the field. Darkness fell between 8 and 9 p.m., ending the fight on the Frosttown Plateau. While Meade's men fought in the north, Brigadier General John P. Hatch's 1st Division moved toward Turner's Gap. A deep ravine separated Hatch from Ricketts' 2nd Division. At 3:30 p.m., Hatch met Hooker at Mount Tabor Church. Hooker had just deployed Meade's division and now sent Hatch into battle. Marsena R. Patrick's 3rd Brigade of New Yorkers led the column. Waiting for them were Kemper's and Garnett's Virginians, Walker's South Carolinians, and Colquitt's Georgians, exhausted from hours of marching. At 5 p.m., Union artillery opened fire on Kemper's brigade. At 5:30, Patrick's New Yorkers attacked Garnett's Virginians. But a gap in Patrick's line weakened the assault. Garnett's men, behind a stone fence on the summit, fired steady volleys that tore into the New Yorkers. General Hatch was wounded in the leg and replaced by Brigadier General Abner Doubleday. On the left, Brigadier General John Gibbon's Black Hat Brigade, Westerners from Wisconsin and Indiana, charged Colquitt's line. Pinned down by deadly fire, the 6th and 7th Wisconsin pressed forward. Lieutenant Colonel Edward S. Bragg led a bold maneuver, advancing his regiment's wings in succession and firing heavy volleys. The Black Hats surged up the slopes and dislodged Colquitt's men. Watching the assault, McClellan asked Hooker, "What troops are those fighting on the pike?" "Gibbon's brigade of Western men," Hooker replied. "They must be made of iron," McClellan said. And so the Iron Brigade was born. On the right, Doubleday's Yankees pressed Garnett's 400 Virginians. By 7 p.m., Garnett and Kemper were defeated. They fell back at 7:30, just as Walker's brigade arrived to shore up the line. Doubleday attacked again, but darkness began to shroud the field. Fighting continued until 8:30 to 9 p.m., when the mountain finally fell silent. The Battle of South Mountain, also known as Boonesboro Gap, ended in a major Union victory. The Army of the Potomac had forced its way through the mountain passes. Lee's scattered Confederates retreated in disarray. Turner's Gap, Fox's Gap, and Crampton's Gap were all in Union hands. D.H. Hill's division retreated off the mountain at 10 p.m. Lee, with no word from Jackson and Longstreet's wing battered, faced a grim reality. Little Mac had kept his word. He had whipped Bobby Lee. That night, Lee sat in his tent, weary and grim. The Maryland campaign seemed lost. He ordered a general withdrawal toward the Potomac. But at noon on September 15th, a messenger arrived from Stonewall Jackson. "Harper's Ferry will surrender today." Lee's eyes lit up. The tide had turned. The campaign would continue. The war would march on. Don't miss what's next. If you enjoyed this gripping retelling of the Battle of South Mountain, make sure to follow, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you never miss another thrilling chapter in history. More epic stories are on the way, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. History lives here. Let's keep it alive together.